Welcome, everybody, to LOL, Laugh Out Loud. Kind of. It's left on left criticism, where we do laugh out loud to keep ourselves from crying. I am Craig Pasta Jardula, the captain here, your host, along with the professor, Jeremy Kuzmarov. And we're breaking down today what's going on with this whole terrorist attack in Moscow and drawing the parallels and letting people see on how it's so similar to what we witnessed in the initial military action from Russia and Ukraine. And Jeremy, I think this a lot of the people they were sold a bill of goods on this situation. Now let's put up your article because I think your article is awesome. It is juicy, guys. If you don't know, Jeremy writes for Covert Action Magazine, right? What is your actual title over there, Professor?
Managing editor of Covert Action Magazine.
And this one, like I said, these articles that he writes are very juicy. The one that we're talking about right now is the CIA director, William Burns, capo of the world's biggest spreader of lies and misinformation, is spreading the lie that Russia's invasion of Ukraine was unprovoked. I've gone as far as, if you can get that up there, right there. No, get the title in there. Let's show the title there, Cheese Slice. I've gone as far as saying, and I've gotten in trouble about this before, I've gone as far as saying that not only was it not just provoked, it was justified, right? I mean, they didn't get in there to start a war. They got in there to stop a war. And we got to realize what happened in 2014. And you can go back further than that. I'm sure, Professor, you can lay out some examples on how the United States has always meddled in Ukraine because it was one of those countries that was split. Part of the country fought with the Nazis in World War II. The other side of the country, the east side of the country, fought with the Russians, the Communist Party, the Soviet Union, against the Nazis. So it was always a country that's been split for quite some time. And the United States has always used that to their advantage for a proxy war with the Russians. And if they can bleed them in any way they could, like they did in Afghanistan by supporting the Mujahideen, to fight the Russians, they're going to do so, right? Because there's some of these people who are lost in that Cold War mentality, especially the people who are in charge right now, the Vicky Newlands, who are married to Robert Kagan, the Jake Sullivans, the John Kirbys, the Antony Blinkens. They are anti-Russian advocates to the nines. And this article does so much to talk about the spreading of information that it was unprovoked. And I want to lay it out because I think this draws so many parallels to what's going on in this Moscow attack of today that just happened last weekend, right? I mean, I'm a poker player and I have a lot of poker analogies, Professor. And what I would say is that the United States has so many tells. And if you watch the movie Rounders, Mikey sees Teddy KGB has a tell when he gets to the Oreos, and he tells when he's got a hand. And Mikey discovers that tell, so then he knows when to fold and when to bet. Well, the United States has tells all over the place. Do you want to give us some insight, Professor, onto why it was not unprovoked? And in your thoughts, if you even, in fact, like me, think it was justified? Because I'm not a big, once again, I'm not an ideologue. I don't go around wearing I Love Putin t-shirts, even though we had them and we wore them as a joke to kind of troll the Democratic Party at one point years ago. But it's not the fact that I'm just so pro-Russia, even though I think there's a reason why we have to analyze why Putin got almost 87% of the vote over there, and he does so much for their country compared to what we have over here. But it's the fact that the United States always wants to do these things to start the wars, and then they would do what? They go lie to the public. Professor, please.
Yeah, well, people can ask the question: what would happen if it was in reverse? If Russia had had made a promise that they wouldn't expand the Warsaw Pact military alliance into Mexico and Central America, and then they started doing that. If Russia had initiated a coup d'état in Mexico and against a leader that was friendly toward the United States, and installed a leader that was very hostile to them, and if there was a secessionist movement that was threatening to break away in parts of Mexico, and then the Mexican government with heavy Russian funding attacked the people there and killed 10,000 people, how would the United States react?
Yeah. This is so important to talk about because there are people out there, and don't get me wrong, listen, Scott Horton, I like the guy a lot. When I spoke at the Rage Against the War Machine rally, and you were there too as well. I had a little get-together the day before, and you saw what I was trying to do. I had libertarians in the room, populist right people in the room, leftists in the room. Misty was there. You were there. Kyle, who's a libertarian. So many people. Clint Russell. All these different types of people of different ideologies, of different teams getting together in one room saying, where can we come together? How can we build bridges? That's what I'm all about. That's why I started this show, and I wanted to do so. And I think it's important for us to critique our own side. But there are certain people like Scott Horton, who was the first person to congratulate me when I got off the stage. We had bonded. I got him some Dr. Pepper cotton candy because he was a Dr. Pepper guy. And I remember him disassembling Bill Crystal, right? Just tearing Mr. Crystal apart while having a Dr. Pepper in hand. Now a lot of people are boycotting and not drinking Dr. Pepper because of the Gaza situation. But still, it was kind of fun. I brought him some Dr. Pepper cotton candy. Nonetheless, when he came on the show, there are a few things that I disagree with him. One of the things I disagree is the fact that he thought that there were other options for the United States. Let's get that next video ready too as well, because I don't believe there were any more options. I believe they exhausted every single options. Minsk 1, Minsk 2. We found out they were lies, where the United States was just supplying the Ukrainians to go in there and cause a serious war. But even people like Claire Daly, right? But this is Joe Biden over here. And once again, this is the tell, Professor, right? You have in that article from the CIA, William Burns article, how the bombing was increased 9 days before the Russians went in there, leaving them no choice. And there are a lot of people in Russia who thought that Putin dragged his feet. Even Yanukovych, as he was fleeing the country, told Vladimir, hey, man, you're going to have to get involved in because they're going to arm Nazis. And these Nazis will fire on their own people in the Donbass. They don't care. That's why the United States, who has a history of arming all these radical groups like the Mujahideen, like the Contras in South America, Latin America, Central America, that is, they constantly do it. So here is Joe Biden, once again, tipping his hat, in my personal opinion, Professor, and giving the tell, saying that they're going to go in. We have intelligence. No, they left Vladimir Putin and the Russian Federation no choice but to go in there and protect these people in the Donbass from a slaughter. Here's Uncle Joe, and then we'll get your opinions right after, Professor.
Indication about whether President Putin has made a decision on whether to invade. Do you feel confident that he hasn't made that decision already?
As of this moment, I'm convinced he's made the decision. We have reason to believe that.
You are convinced that President Putin is going to invade Ukraine. Is that what you just said a few moments ago?
Yes, I did. Yes.
So is diplomacy off the table then?
No. Until he does, diplomacy is always a possibility.
What reason do you have to believe he's considering that option at all?
We have a significant intelligence capability. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
All right, so there it is. It's a significant
Ukraine.
intelligence capability. Your thoughts, Professor, on that? Is that really the intelligence coming in, or is it we're going to force his hand by ramping up the bombing? And in that CIA director article, you show the intensified bombing 9 days before. In fact, there were some people who said when the Russians came in, like, thank God you were here because we were about to get slaughtered. Professor?
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head there, that this was a deliberate policy to draw the Russians in, that they were going to provoke them into a war, that the neoconservatives in Washington wanted this war. And I think the mastermind of this strategy, although he was no longer alive, was Zbigniew Brzezinski. He was also the mastermind of the U.S. strategy in Afghanistan in the 80s, where he bragged about drawing the Soviets into the Afghan trap.
Yes.
By supporting the Afghan Mujahideen, the most violent and extremist elements in Afghanistan, to subvert a pro-Soviet revolutionary government in Afghanistan. And it was known that that would draw the Russians into Afghanistan. And the goal was to bankrupt the Soviet Union. And he thought this was such a successful strategy, even though it cost who knows how many Afghan lives. And it resulted in the rise of Islamic terrorism that were financed and trained by the United States. And similar with Ukraine, it was used to draw the Russian in. Yeah, these provocative acts were taken because Putin was an independent nationalist. The U.S. had wanted the continuation of the Boris Yeltsin government of the 1990s. Yeltsin had basically opened the Russian economy to foreign multinational corporations that were starting to gain control over Russia's rich natural resources. And Putin was supposed to continue that process, but instead he started to reclaim Russian control over its own economy and to strengthen Russia. and the neoconservatives wanted to dominate the entire Eurasian region.
Absolutely.
And that's what Brzezinski advocated for in his book, The Grand Chessboard.
Yep.
And after the fall of the Soviet Union, they thought there was a great opportunity. So they had to ruin Putin. And the way to do it was to draw him into a quagmire in Ukraine. That's why they're going to keep up this war, even though it's an unwinnable war. Their strategy is to just bleed the Russians, harm their economy, and ratchet up sanctions.
Yep.
Although Putin circumvented it because he's adapted well to the sanctions by drawing closer to China, trading with India,
Iran. It backfired on the United States and their plan. I think of that song when I think about Bill Clinton and Boris Yeltsin. And that was listen, after Kosovo, I think that was the reason why a lot of hardliners in Russia said, okay, we got to get rid of this fall down drunk, and we got to pick somebody who is going to be very balanced, but not let the United States walk all over us. And that's how Putin came to power. At the end of the day, I always talk about socialist governments like in Nicaragua, right? Like it's a collective government. They have no choice but to pull together their resources and their power, their manpower, because the United States wants to go in there and take everything away from them, including their resources and their sovereignty. And I think about that song, like I was talking about, by the Police. You'll be wrapped around my finger. And that was Boris Yeltsin with the Clintons. He was doing everything they wanted him to do. But I still want to point out a fact, because this reminds me, this is Claire Daly over here, and I love Claire, right? She is amazing. She is fire. I love Mick Wallace. I got to meet him in Nicaragua during the elections. These people are awesome. But sometimes it's a slippery slope. And when I hear this rhetoric, it makes me think, Professor, of when all these people are saying, yes, Assad is a brutal dictator, but no, you're playing crap games again, because now you're setting a rhetoric in which no matter what, you can't justify what Assad's doing. You can't justify what Putin is doing. And here is Claire Daly doing the same thing that everybody falls into the trap. And then I want to get your opinions on it right after. Here's Claire.
Exactly 18 months from the start of the war in Ukraine, or Russia's unprovoked war of aggression, as it's called repeatedly on our airwaves, repeated time and again, which kind of gives you a clue that the war actually was provoked. That doesn't mean that it was justified. Russia had no right to invade the sovereign territory of Ukraine. This was 100% illegal, but it was provoked. And unless we understand that, then there can be no solution to the conflict that takes place, that is taking place.
All right, let's pause it right there. Professor, is this a dangerous type of rhetoric over here? I said before, you play crap games, you win crap prizes. It seems like it's a quagmire, and you're setting yourself up for failure if you say, oh, it's an unjustified war, but it was provoked. It seems like you're contradicting yourself in the same sentence. And like I said, I love Claire, and she's not the only one guilty of this. I felt Scott Horton was guilty of this. I felt a lot of people in the Libertarian Party, friends of mine, would say, yeah, Putin's awful, but no. It was to stop a war. It was to stop a slaughter. Do you see the dangers of having that type of rhetoric when you already kind of set a standard in which that person is awful, but I mean, it kind of lessens your argument that the United States needs to stop doing what it's doing. Go ahead, Professor.
I would say so, yeah. I think it's important to look at it from a Russian point of view. It was a war of self-defense because the United States was going to use Ukraine as a base to promote regime change in Russia. And I mean, we see that Ukraine has been launching attacks into Russia now. They've been carrying out assassinations in Russia. So no country is going to tolerate that. And ethnic Russian were being slaughtered by the Ukrainian military and neo-Nazi Azov battalion. So I would agree, it does undercut that this was a war of American aggression, really. And I think the New York Times made that point clear when they had this expose a couple of weeks ago about how Ukraine transformed itself into a base for the CIA after the Maidan coup of 2014, with at least 12 CIA bases set up there, and they're training Ukrainian commandos. So, yeah, I think the anti-war movement should be very strong in condemning U.S. action and aggression in Ukraine and triggering this conflict.
Yeah. And also, too, in your article, that juicy article, like I said, Jeremy Kuzmarov, the professor, his articles are juicy as can be. It's like a 3.5 hour smoked brisket that comes out that is tender as can be, but when you squeeze it, the juice is still coming on out. He mentions those biolabs. For my truther friends out there, I'm not forgetting about you too as well. But another reason why Putin said, enough is enough. You got bioweapons labs all over the place. We already saw what happened with the COVID-19. We're not going to sit there and play games. Was it came out of a wet market, bad soup? Was it the Chinese? Was it the Americans? Certainly had American funding. And now you got bioweapons labs all over the place. And there's an argument that they've been trying to make certain bioweapons that are specific for certain races. And Putin was not going to sit back and say, I'm going to allow this to happen on my border. Let's go to the Moscow Massacre of today. We just laid out for you, ladies and gentlemen, the United States tipping its hat. They have a tell. They went in there. They increased the bombing. They had all this stuff going on. In my mind, leaving the Russians no choice but to go in there eventually after they tried Minsk 1, Minsk 2 to come to some type of agreement and realize that was nothing but a stall technique. Well, we have this massacre in Moscow that we saw the other day. And, for some of us, it's very easy. Immediately we said, what is the United States' involvement in it? The CIA has their fingerprints all over it. If it is ISIS-K, well, we funded ISIS-K. We supported and created ISIS-K. How much blame is it on us? If it's the Ukrainians, as the Ukrainians go, the United States goes. So here is Mr. John Kirby, right, talking about before it happened, hey, Professor, stay out of, music halls, venues, and stuff like that. Listen to this.
I've also seen, hopefully you saw our State Department or embassy there put out a notice to all Americans in Moscow to avoid any large gathering, concerts, obviously shopping malls, anything like that, just for their own safety. They should stay put where they are and stay plugged into the State Department for any additional updates and information. I'm afraid that's really all I have on that.
Thank you. So question, did the U.S. have prior knowledge of this attack in Moscow, given that the U.S. Embassy had issued warning beforehand?
I'm not aware of any advanced knowledge that we had of this terrible attack.
Wow.
March 8th, the embassy warns of imminent attack in Moscow by extremists.
Yeah, I think that I'll let the State Department speak to that. But I don't think that was related to this specific attack.
All right, play dumb. There it is, right there, Professor. And we got more, right? Not just that. It's like, hey, dude, did you have an ace? No, I didn't have an ace. I saw your card. You had an ace, right? You had an ace. Don't lie to me. I saw it. I mean, this is a tell. Also, there's one more, Professor, and I'll get your opinions. And the big question is, do you think the United States has its fingerprints all over it? Let's listen to Vicky Nan, who's no longer there anymore in the State Department and has been resigned or retired or whatnot. And she just keeps coming back like a vampire. How can we miss you if you don't go away, Vicky Nan? Listen to this, Professor.
With this money, Ukraine will be able to fight back in the East, but it will also be able to accelerate the asymmetric warfare that has been most effective on the battlefield. And as I said in Kyiv 3 weeks ago, this supplemental funding will ensure Putin faces some nasty surprises on the battlefield.
She said 2 weeks ago, Professor, we got some surprises for Vladimir Putin. And that's when she showed up when Zaluzny, the general of the forces in Ukraine, was sacked by Zelensky, and they were having a back and forth. She had to go there and solidify the fact that Zelensky's still in charge and Zaluzny was out. But your thoughts is there fingerprints from the United States all over this attack? And I'm going to throw a little bonus question in there for you. I think United States people, citizens, are very privileged. The fact that we don't have many attacks on our own soil. Should we now be concerned that the United States, there could be an attack on our soil?
Well, on the first question, my instinct would be, no, they can't do something like that. But then having studied history and seen them done it many times before, that this is the group that bombed the Nord Stream pipeline, that had been supporting assassination within Russia, they would stoop to anything, even something ghastly like that. And I mean, we know that the Tajiks, in the past, the CIA has recruited Muslim Islamic elements in Chechnya and Tajikistan. In fact, they've used Tajiks in Afghanistan to fight against the Taliban. So that leaves open the possibility that these Tajiks, through a third party, had some financing or training from the United States. And they would use, the comment about nasty, it just showed what kind of nasty person she is. I mean, she wants to just spread mayhem and death, and that's our government is taken over by these ghouls. And yeah, there's been a program to try and destabilize the Russian government. Scott Ritter had an article about how the U.S. CIA and Ukraine were supporting far right-wing paramilitary elements to try and promote destabilization around the time of the election. So this could fit with a larger strategy. And then there's the pattern in American history. Yeah, and I think Americans have to fear their own government. With these ghouls running the government, the American people are in grave danger from their own government. And we've seen that historically, whether it's the Pearl Harbor incident where the Japanese were deliberately provoked, and the Roosevelt administration and George C. Marshall withheld information from naval commanders in Hawaii, allowing that attack to go forward that killed 3,000
They wanted that attack. They wanted that attack. They wanted it. Well, listen, different times, different places. Now we have nuclear weapons. I think Putin once echoed, and I think it was Albert Einstein who originally said this, right? World War III will be fought with nuclear weapons. World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones. And that's what we're facing right now. The number one job of the United States president should be to keep us out of war with Russia. It seems like they want to get us into a war with Russia. And I want you to answer the second question. But before we do, let's play a little Scott Ritter, since you mentioned him, Professor, and what he is saying. Listen, Scott Ritter said in short, and we're going to play this little clip here, and we'll stop it because it's a long clip. But he said, in short, the Russians know everything. They didn't apprehend or arrest these guys right away from the Moscow massacre. They let them drive, and they have their phones, and they have their communications. So they know. But to me, you're going to F around and find out if we keep doing this, how long could we sit back and say that it's not inevitable that there'll be an attack on our own soil? Let's listen to Scott Ritter. We got a couple minutes left, and give us your thoughts on what he has to say.
President Vladimir Putin has just finished delivering an address to the Russian nation about the horrible events that transpired yesterday at the Crocus City Hall and concert venue outside of Moscow. A terrible terrorist attack that has killed hundreds, and the death count is still being tallied. The president spoke forcefully. He spoke directly. He spoke about the resilience of the Russian people. He spoke about the absolute destiny of the perpetrators, the harsh justice that will be meted out to them. He also made a comment about how the attackers fled towards Ukraine. Now, the Russian president made it clear that there is an ongoing investigation and that the Russian intelligence and security services will get to the bottom of this. But let's talk about that aspect, that the attackers were fleeing towards Ukraine.
All right, that's good. So he went on to talk about this, and as the days transpired, Scott had mentioned that the Russians have everything. They know, they understand. And listen, for us, it was like, United States, fingerprints all over this, right? So we have a minute and change left of the segment. Professor, please answer this question, your thoughts on the fact that the Russians know everything, and should we be concerned about an attack on American soil? How longer could we keep doing these actions and not expect something to happen here at home? Go ahead, Professor.
Well, yeah, and obviously it's telling if they were heading to Ukraine. And yeah, in general, as I said, the American people, unfortunately, have to fear their own government, who's involved and is doing the exact opposite of what they're supposed to do. Their mandate is to protect national security, and they do the exact opposite, triggering conflicts all around the world that will benefit the arms makers, and it leaves the United States ultimately vulnerable to some kind of attack in the future.
Yeah. And do you think it could happen on our own soil, or do you think that's possible that it won't happen? I mean, I'm not talking about Pearl Harbor or Guam or a couple bases in the Middle East. I'm saying right here on the mainland. If we're going to go in there and we're going to send the most radical of radicals to kill civilians in a concert hall, what's to stop them, Professor?
Well, and particularly if they want to trigger a new war with China, they're building the military apparatus for that. They want to, contain China, keep China down, ensure another century of American dominance in the Asia Pacific. it would require some kind of major attack on American soil for the public to get behind the war against China. So they could very easily engineer something, and we should be fearful of that.
Yeah, I think so too, Professor. And I don't know what the antidote is and what we should do, but we need to start holding this government accountable here. American citizens need to get to the streets and get in front of these people's faces and let them know, no more, Professor, will you put our lives in danger? It's bad enough that you put all the world's lives in danger, but something's going to happen here. The chickens are coming home to roost. That's it for the show today, ladies and gentlemen. LOL, laugh out loud, or left on left criticism, where the left critiques itself and does it with a laugh so we keep ourselves from crying. I am your host, Craig Pasta Jardula, the captain, along with the Professor Jeremy Kuzmarov. We'll see you on the flip side.